nature, baby!
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the special Sunday 9 p.m. stream for Uncut History. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Let's get him unmuted. There we are. He's live.
Ahoy! Permission to come aboard, sir.
Permission granted.
I come aboard. What's the reply to that? I don't actually know. Oh, good. I stand
you can't
aboard.
walk. You can't really walk. You're like, I'm already here. I guess if I say no, I kick you out. I guess that's how that works. I don't know.
Yeah,
so
you just send me packing. Get the hell off my ship. It's a great Shepard reaction. In Mass Effect 3, the Quarians fire on you. I always choose the Renegade interrupt where you punch the Admiral in the stomach. You're like, get off my ship.
It gets the point across pretty easily. Nobody else try it. Saw what happened to the first guy? Don't be the next one. Well, we got Captain Garrett of the Swords and Starships podcast and the author of Blood and Oak. So, been chasing him down for several weeks with fly tape, just trying to stick him. It's like, you're coming with me. You're coming on the stream. No. I've been wanting to get him on for a while. Been wanting to get a historical fiction author on. We have not had a historical fiction author be our guest. So, and you're the first guest of 2024, actually. Took a whole month.
Awesome. It is my honor, sir.
It's been a busy month. Now,
poor Star Fury. How is he going to survive this? He's still awake.
Oh yeah. So he how much caffeination do you have, Star Fury, right now?
Star Fury is such a good. He's so supportive. It's like, oh, I'll stay. It's like, believe me. I meant what I said. I appreciate the time people invest in channels. It's crazy. It's as valuable as a super chat, definitely.
And we are having a lot of people tune in tonight. Thank you for tuning again on Sunday, which I'm not used to. I think it's the first time I've ever done anything on Sunday. Saturday, I've done a few things, but Sunday, never. I'm weird. So I could be a very good host and ask, what are the humble beginnings of Captain Garrett? But I have a much better question. How the heck is Argyle 2 hours and 40 minutes?
Oh my God. Dear God. So
I told you this is the bonus hour, guys.
I'm kind of a perfectionist. I'm like, my standard is I must review the whole thing. And so I was actually going to watch the whole thing, but then Erigmar was hounding me today about, you said you'd read my book and you haven't. I'm okay. And so I literally I speed read as much of it. His book's not too long. It's about 90 pages. And so I'm like, I will have it done by my stream. And I got really close. I got to the very last chapter. And so thank you, Erigmar, aka Black Knight, if you're out there. You spared me having to watch the rest of Argyle. But I will tell you, just from 40 minutes, it's what a nightmare.
Oh, God. So Star Fury, I'm like, as long as they have tits, I'm fine. Must be a British thing.
Well, then you're definitely not fine here. What are you doing here?
What is he doing? What is he implying?
What are you trying to say, Star Fury?
So, yeah. The reason I actually asked you that, it was something I've been wanting to mention for a while. And I think I've probably talked about before on my channel. Why is every movie got to be like 2.5+ hours nowadays? What happened to the 90-minute runtime?
Well, I think I'm calling it institutionalized mediocrity. Institutionalized, because in the old days, right, you make a pilot, it bombs, you don't get a season order. Or you make a pilot, it does okay, you get a half season order, maybe the half season does okay, you get a second half of season order. Oh, you had decent ratings? Okay, we'll think about, okay, we're going to order a second season, there's enough interest. And if you failed, right, you couldn't hide behind anything. But I think what's happened is because some people kind of shy away from just getting right at what I think is the heart of the matter. That was the profit model. Now we have shifted to the ideological model. Ideology does not care about dollars and cents. It doesn't care about money. It just cares about, replicating itself in the sphere. So the measurement of success for ideology is how many people are hearing it, how is the platform being used. And what that has done is it has institutionalized mediocrity, because now, if, say, Nia DaCosta directs a film like The Marvels that is an absolute and total disaster, has undisciplined runtime, bad editing, etc., you could say, well, what are you implying about this proud black woman? Nothing. I'm just saying. So it's like that, and so now they can blame all the isms for failure instead of blaming themselves, which is a professional artist takes responsibility and ownership, and an amateur artist blames others. But in the old days, you could blame people all you wanted, but nobody cared because you were in a cutthroat industry that would just cut your throat and be like, well, you suck. Get off my set. Can't do that anymore. Now it's like, oh, well, but I'm glad that we're giving an indigenous person, missing a leg, a voice. And it's like, so literally you have made mediocrity an institution. And so there's no discipline in runtimes. There's no editing. There's no craftsmanship. The way that you rise through the ranks now is not about finding a mentor, learning at their feet. None of that.
I've always thought, too, it's this whole idea everybody wants to be a deconstruction. They call every single thing that comes out today, we are deconstructing traditions. We're deconstructing the norms. This stuff is all passé. It must be deconstructed for what it really is. Much like how we had the whole Arcane drama where they just decided to kill the most popular Batman. Just cold blood. We don't need him. And also, as much as our friend Stormcrow and me enjoy the wonderful deconstruction of mecha that is Neon Genesis Evangelion that he's trying to implore you to watch.
I have seen it.
As you will.
You're talking about the original? The original Evangelion?
Yeah,
the
original.
Watched it when I was in high school.
Sees Crow. Sees.
I love like the first season of it. I've talked about it before, I think. Stormcrow, are you saying you have missed at least a minute of my 5 hours of streams? No, I like the first season, but what I hated is the character of, I think was it Shinji? Was that his name?
He's the main character.
He never grows. He never stands up for himself. He never learns.
No, he does.
That was my issue. Was not.
He never gets in the damn robot.
Brilliant concept. Excellent kaiju kind of story. Sometimes anime and manga is so good at concept, they're just not always good at character. And I think that's why like a better version of that for me was Blue Gender. I think Blue Gender was amazing because it starts with a very Shinji-like character in Yuji at the beginning. And he's just like Shinji in Evangelion. He's always afraid and he's always crying and he's always running from the monsters. By the end of it, he is a stone cold badass. He's like the MVP by the end of that series. It's magnificent.
And I will say this, what's so fascinating is when you get to Evangelion, if you've not seen the series, you've seen the merchandise for it. You've seen the characters. They're everywhere. It's not, and a lot of people West will ask, like, why am I seeing these characters? You go to Japan, like Neon Genesis Evangelion is one of the biggest pop culture franchises in that country. It's massive. It's huge. They have them on subway systems. They have them on every type of merchandise. I made a joke in one of my Oscar Langley Soryu video. Yes, there is Neon Genesis Evangelion buckets like being sold. I'm not making this up. It's crazy. I think people like the characters because what they could have been, and there's so much spin-off material, so many games. A lot of it's like high school related games. Like there's no stakes. It's just daily high school life thing. People are like what the characters could have been, like their innate personality traits are then what they end up becoming, where they really don't evolve over time. And they're always hunched up in the corner and don't get in the robot. So it's interesting. Like it's this big franchise, but you can see it in its popularity that everybody likes the characters, but they don't necessarily like them in the actual story, if that makes sense. Like there's an
Yeah.
idea here, and we want to see good things happen to these characters. We want to see them actually progress instead of regress. And I'm going to actually tie this all back to our first statement of there are good deconstructions out there, but everybody wants to be a deconstruction today. Nobody wants to just make a good story. Everybody's more focused about reverse engineering a story before they even know how to write an actual story. Yeah. And I think that's where you get the longer runtime, because it's basically a broken record. They're spinning on the first step of a good story because they're trying to deconstruct it. And then we end up with a 3-hour piece of mess.
There's a lot of pieces to that. Part of it is a lot of artists have an amateur mindset. Like a lot of artists are all about themselves and their clout. Let's say Rian Johnson is sort of the poster child of this. I think that is Taika Waititi is another good example. Those are creatives that all they care about is their image, and it's all about they want to be original. They don't want to be derivative. And I think that's why they go overboard with all that stuff. Whereas an artist that is trying to show you something from a different angle, they're prioritizing the work and the vision, and that's a professional. But that's what I think it's a combination of things, but also then there's the ideologues. That's the other sort of faction that gets into that. So you're right, Star Fury. Iger did throw Miss DaCosta under the bus. She didn't have enough supervision, don't you know? Yeah, what was I was always like this as a kid. I loved anime. I loved it. But and pretty much anything I watched. I mean, I did not want a cartoonish story even when I was a kid and watching cartoons. Like, I wanted real stakes. I always hated, like, for example, I hated Inspector Gadget as a kid because Dr. Claw never had a chance of winning, ever. That bothered me as a kid. It just did. I was like, why should I watch this? And so I would watch the Ghostbusters live action films as like a 10-year-old. And it was awesome. I loved it. I didn't even know that it was a monster movie. Kind of, it's like, yeah. Aren't you scared of this? I wasn't, because I was like, well, I was a little. Those dogs are scary as hell. But
the library always scared me. The librarian was always the one that scared me.
So I think that I guess what I'm saying is I think that like creatives sometimes look down at kids, and they think that just because they're young, I'm not saying you need to have like blood and gore or anything R-rated, but like they talk down to them like, oh, you're not sophisticated enough to have a character who could lose. You're not sophisticated enough to understand that there's real danger in this story. So we're just going to give you a story where there's no real danger, no real stakes. The weird thing is now that's like spilling out, which I think is condescending, and I don't think that's true. I actually don't think that is historically the way stories were. I think through most of human history, all the way back to sitting around campfires before even writing was invented, I think that the stories adults were telling children were often cautionary fables. Peter and the Wolf. He disregards his uncle's or father's warning, and he goes out alone. And the wolf comes. It's like, that's scary. You could die, right? I actually think, and there's evidence to support this, if you look at the writings of the Puritan settlers and Plymouth Colony and so forth, you look at that, their stories and their teaching materials for their kids were dark. They dealt with death. And I think that's because back then it was about survival. Children had to understand that there was danger in the world, and you don't F around and find out in the Stone Age. You don't, because there is no find out. You just get eaten.
Yeah, you either live or you die horribly.
Yeah. It's a weird I believe it is a modern thing, a product of civilization that we try to shield children from stakes in stories. And now the weird thing is we're doing it with adults too. Now adults don't even want stakes in their stories. It's depressing.
Yeah, no,
it depresses me.
It's so interesting, most stories. I mean, we probably both have the experience of us having interest in history, that half of these, when we try to tell history, it's like they come in the thought police, as I call them. They come on, oh, nope, you got to be careful. You can't say that word, and you can't say it in that context, and you got to make sure to use this phrasing. And it's just like, can I just tell you what happened? It'll be a lot quicker. It'll get to the point. No, we got to go this way around to make sure nobody's feelings are harmed. I'm like, well, if nobody, straightforward, I've always said, if you are upset by a historical event, good. You should learn from it.
Yes, that's not that wasn't a controversial thing back in the day. You know, I
No.
this is the other thing too is I think it's just a function of Western civilization, which is maybe more accurately described as generally civilized democratic societies. Civilized democratic societies are self-reflective because groups of people disagree about whether one thing was right or wrong. You know, it's we tend to we always talk about unity, and I think that's a silly concept. It's like, of course, we're never going to be united because we always are going to disagree. We can have common ground, and we should, as a society, we should have common principles that we generally agree to, you know, which is why Sound of Freedom should not be a controversial film, which is that's frightening that that's a controversial film. But I think the thing you don't see in autocracies or oppressive dictatorships or feudalistic systems, you don't see us worrying about whether we did a bad thing starting that war, or whether we should have ever been in that war, or whether this group of people should ever have been removed from their land. That's not a thing that repressive evil regimes worry about. And so what's weird is that I think we've taken that to an extreme where we blame ourselves for everything. We indict our own societies for every ill. And it's like, that's not healthy, you know?
No. No, I would. No, there's so much. Well, I mean, I think I'd probably say everybody in the United States has been doing that since the 1960s at the earliest.
I think
Or
we've
maybe
always been doing it. We've been doing it since the revolution. People don't realize that during the American Revolution, that was when the abolitionist movement, the abolishment of slavery movement, which had existed, by the way, for decades in the 1700s, for decades, people had been angling for that, especially the Quakers in Pennsylvania were a big driver of that. But a lot of Christians, there were a lot of people that were arguing for it for a long time. During the revolution, we had this beautiful document, the Declaration of Independence. That got it to a peak. It got to the point where when the Constitution was ratified, several of the states had already embedded kind of a phasing out process of the slave trade within like 8 years. This is in like the 1790s. And for a while, there was a big push to like go the whole way, but it just was not going to happen with the southern states. And so, in other words, right at the beginning, the Civil War was already going to happen right from day
yes.
one. It was already starting. So the idea that like as if America was just totally okay with slavery for a long time, and then one day we just decided, you know, this is bad. This is very
Slavery
bad.
bad.
Like, no, it was thought to be bad in the
No.
mid
Yeah.
1700s. It was like, should we be doing this? You know, there were a lot of people that were like, should we be doing this? And obviously they had a long way to go in terms of social mores generally. But yeah, so we have been wrestling with we have always been looking at ourselves with a critical eye right since the beginning. It's only the modern people that don't know history that think otherwise.
I guess too, you'd probably agree when I say this. You always have people that think, well, this time it's going to be different. We have evolved from these other people. We are better off because we have shiny things like smartphones, which means we know more than anybody else.
Yeah. As
Guys, they built the pyramids thousands of years ago, and they didn't have these nice shiny things. I know.
Pete Holmes put it, he was like, it's like we know everything now, and we're not a lick smarter for it. Which I think so.
Yeah, yeah, that basically sums it up. Now, so you were talking a little bit earlier about some earlier shows that you're watching, and you have a certain book eventually. You decide one day you want to write your own story to add to I guess, the pantheon of literature that's out there.
I don't know if I'd call it literature. Yeah, it's definitely literature. It's definitely.
I guess it is words on papers. It is words on papers. I guess they call that literature in certain parts of the world. So, how did you get into Breaking Blood and Oak? I guess where would you really want to start talking about what made you decide, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to make this. Where's it begin?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, since I was a kid, I've always written stories. Like when I was like 8 years old, I would come back from the park with my grandmother and I'd write like a very crude story about a boy who discovers a hidden island and there's treasure and he goes hunting for it. And so like I've always been this way and I always used to tell stories and
Pardon interrupt. Good night, Star Fury. I think he's officially
good
gone
night,
to bed.
Star Fury, you sweet prince. Sleep well. Star Fury is a trooper, man. It's
Yes.
late over there in
I
the aisles.
I appreciate the support for both of us.
I see you, Fu Man Blue, Melodic, Maji Chan. I see everybody. It's good to see you. Melodic's out there. Anyhow, yeah. So I've always told stories. I've always wanted to go places, that I couldn't go in my mind. And I don't know. Every time I would see a good movie or anything, I would just think, wouldn't it be cool if, And so I've always been that way. And so when I was in high school, I started writing a novel as my senior project, and it was just about pirates. And it was set in like the early 1700s, the golden age of piracy. And it was kind of a pirate who fights the British. That would be you, stuff, yeah, right? And no, but
So
anyway,
as we animate this, the villain in his story, it's just Star Fury's avatar
yes,
image.
it's Garrus from Garrus Vakari. Anyway, but I got all the way to like the end, and I didn't know how to write the ending, and I chickened out. I now understand what it was. It was resistance, and it defeated me right at the finish line, which is common. That's common for first-time writers. I didn't know that then, but I understand it now. And I dabbled for years, but I was kind of working a corporate job around 2015 and thinking about what do I want to do with my life. I don't want to just drift, just do whatever. And it was like, okay, I could go back to school, get an MBA, rise through the corporate ranks. I'm showing some promise. I'm into fitness, and so I thought, oh, I could be a personal trainer. I just going through all the things I could be, but the one thing I could never get away from was like I've always wanted to be a writer, a storyteller, a novelist, a filmmaker. I've always had aspirations for that. Frankly, I'm even kind of interested in video games. So, and I never thought of myself as a business guy either, but then I started to think like the way to do that, it seems to me, is to do it with total freedom, have nobody to control you. And this is before even now when it's like super crazy. And I just thought, what if I could just sell my own stuff and be independent? And so I kind of got it. And I just said, you know what? I'm going all in on this. And I just considered it my second job to write this novel. And it took me about 3 years to research it, outline it, write it. And then the second book I was able to write within a year of publishing the first book. And then I made a fatal, fatal mistake, which I now know the mistake I made. When you finish a novel, you immediately start writing the next one. You must do, if you finish a screenplay, you start writing the next screenplay. You do not stop, because when you stop to rest on your laurels, resistance comes in and fills your head with a bunch of bullshit about you deserve to go celebrate. You deserve some time off. You deserve whatever. And what happened then is I got really caught up in like, now how do I sell this? How do I market it? It turned into all business, and then of course I came up against an existential crisis. My work's no good. Nobody knows it exists. I'm terrible at this. Nobody cares about tall ships anymore. Why am I bothering? This was a terrible idea for a story. And then I started working on my science fiction book, Galaxy Born, and that became this whole other thing, which is building all the lore for a future science fiction world. And that's been years I've been working on that. And then other things happen, and I won't bore you with the details, but the short of the long is I just have spent a lot of years spinning my wheels in resistance because I'm trying to figure out the business while trying to figure out the artist at the same time. And I actually kind of feel like I'm finally starting to figure it out. And The War of Art is a book that's helped me immensely with that because it explained all the mistakes I was making, all those mistakes I just listed. So anyhow, I have had, my plan was to write Galaxy Born, then Blood and Oak, then another Galaxy Born, then Blood and Oak, and just do that for a while. And I still kind of plan on doing that. But yeah, Blood and Oak is kind of wound up on ice for a while. So that's kind of what I'm wrestling with. It's like, I got to get back into it. And so that's what I'm working on. And building the channel is part of my method. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how did I decide this? Well, I've thought about quitting a lot of times. It's a lonely, difficult path to set out to be a successful artist. And this is not me like, having a pity party or anything, but it's and there are times where you think I'm not cut out for it or this isn't the right path for me, and I've seriously considered quitting. I'm just gonna like become an accountant or something like that. I'm just gonna get a job that pays really lots of money, make millions in something else, and live the life I want. And I'll just and I'll write as a hobby. Can't do it. Can't do it. I don't have a choice. These stories are in me whether I want them or not. It's not even my choice. It's like I have stories
I,
in me. I
I
have a
can relate to
thousand.
that idea. When you say that I'm kind of married to these stories, these characters. There's nobody else that's going to produce them, and I must find a way, or else these characters will never live in a sense.
It's so true. Like I can't help it. Like I just see opportunity. I get ideas all the time. All the time. I'm getting like I could. I'll probably never write. I'll probably never write more than 5% of the story ideas in my head. Even if I wrote like a crazy, like Brandon Sanderson writes like 5 books a year, which is insane. It's like, even if I were writing at that pace, I don't think I'd ever do more than 10% of the ideas I have. That doesn't mean they're all great ideas or they would have been worth pursuing. But I just get ideas for things all the time. And a lot of the time it's just watching movies. Weird thing though. Weird thing. It's like lately, um, I'm kind of amazed by like watching so many bad shows like Ahsoka and I'm not kidding. It's like I really start to feel kind of numb to even just storytelling. And so I really do mean it that when I saw Godzilla minus one, it moved me deeply. These characters became like a family I never knew I needed, strangely, and it was like, wow, why is this movie having such a profound effect on me? I don't understand it. Yes, it's a great story, but why this one? Why is this one moving me to the core? And I just think it's because it literally reminded me why I love stories. It just does. It reminds me of like why stories are so powerful, so magical. Shkishkima is such a brilliant damn character. He is so brilliant as a character. He speaks to me on every level because he's wrestling with all those things in a kind of different way than I'm wrestling with. And it makes me feel like, that moment is coming when I could step into that plane and take on my monster, slay that monster, my Godzilla. What a great movie that is. It's so
I,
brilliant.
you're gonna slay me for saying this, but you're gonna get your sword out. And I have yet to see it. I've been meaning to. And
It just means that the present is not yet unwrapped. That's all that means.
I really wanted to go see it in the
It's still
theater,
under the tree
but
for you.
my
Waiting for Christmas morning. You're gonna be so happy.
with my schedule, it might be literally Christmas morning. It might be. Oh, it's December 25th, 2024. Time to finally
Gojira,
watch this.
says Melodic.
Godzilla. I gotta find a way. Wouldn't it be awesome to do like a delay voice where I'm saying Godzilla, but my lips are moving before you hear it, so I can be like the English translations of the '50s films.
Yeah, dude. I'll tell you, I always know what a good movie is because when I'm sitting in that movie, I get ideas for my own stories. And believe me, sometimes it's totally unrelated to what I'm even watching. It's like this is a totally different genre. I just bam, an idea pops in there, and I just think it's because the experience of living in a story world. I didn't used to think this way. I truly didn't. When I was in high school, I thought stories were all about my own personal genius, if such as it might exist. I now realize it's totally wrong. I think stories and art doesn't come from our brain. It comes from the universe. It comes from something greater than ourselves, and we're channeling it. We're channeling it, and some of us maybe are better at channeling it than others. But that's true of anyone who builds, creates, does anything creative, and we all are creative. Every human being has creativity in them. Um, it's like my dad. He builds things. He builds houses and furniture, and he's great at it. He's really. You should see some of the things he's done with $2 juniper wood. he builds this amazing countertop. I could never do that. But he has vision. He just has vision of how it could be done. And it's like, so for me, I now understand that like that is an energy you're tapping into, an energy field of creation, and the work of the artist is no less difficult because the work of the artist is you need tools to bring that into the world. It's almost as if like these stories want to be told, but to find form, they need hands that can sculpt them into form, and those hands need skills. And so the work of the artist is to hone those skills, to get better and better and better at like bringing these ideas into the world. And the problem with an amateur mindset that we see in all these lunatics that are running the major properties now is they don't see it that way. They think it's all about them. It's all about their following. It's all about their message and all the things they want and what good people they are for making sure everybody is lectured about all the crimes that their ancestors have committed and blah, blah, blah. That's all about them. That's all about narcissism and self-glorification and ego. And it's destructive. It's destructive of art. Yeah, so I've gotten very spiritual. I've gotten very spiritual in my old age.
No, it's no. I agree with a lot what you were saying. A lot of this, I can relate to a lot. Let's just say that. Now, you could make any story in your mind. In theory, any universe, if you're going to be a storyteller, you can make anything to your heart's desire. And some storytellers, what I call the mainstream storytellers, they abuse that power and decide to make their perfect little safe space their story without actually making something interesting for the audience. But instead of just making up a universe, you decided to do what arguably is one of the hardest ways of storytelling, and that's putting yourself into a historical setting. And Blood and Oak is set in a particular time period that is greatly overlooked, at least by Americans. And I'm actually going to pull up your cover for the first.
Awesome.
Hold on one moment. So well,
I will say I used to think historical was harder, but working on a science fiction world, much harder. Yeah, there it is. Blood and Oak, the apple of my eye. Because history is known and it has rules and factions already built in. And so all I have to do is go to the history. Whereas with a world of my own making, it's like I can change the rules whenever it suits me. And it takes even more discipline to world build, I think. So I have a new appreciation for that. But yes, thank you. That is my book, Blood and Oak. And it's the log line is, when his sister is kidnapped and sold into slavery by the Barbary pirates, a daring young midshipman embarks on a suicidal quest of rescue and revenge. And people don't realize that the Barbary pirates for 300 years were harvesting slaves from all over the shores of Europe. They were also harvesting slaves from Africa and other areas in the Middle East. And it was an ongoing practice. And the reason why the United States became involved is because once the British Empire was no longer, the protector of the colonies, now the colonies were their own country, the mighty superpower British fleet was no longer there to protect us. And when the Barbary pirates started preying on all of our ships, the British were happy to say, oh, well, that's your problem now. Enjoy. And so what is a broke, little tiny new country that is still paying off debt? That's back when we used to pay off debt. Is still paying debt from the Revolutionary War. And the only way to stop their sailors being enslaved and their ships being seized on the Mediterranean, which was a vital trade route. The country couldn't survive without that trade route because it was a desperate situation. What do? Well, we could pay them, which is humiliating, and it goes against the very values we fought for, and it's also expensive, or we could fight them. But that would mean having to build a military, and for a lot of years, that was too unpalatable. But then eventually Thomas Jefferson, who kind of was something of an imperialist and an ideologue, he's my favorite founding father, personally, but he had kind of an imperialist streak. And he was like, no, we need to prove to the world that we are, we're putting our money where our mouth is and inspire the rest of the world to agree with us. that this is what free people have to do. They have to fight for what they believe in. But he secretly said, "But if it doesn't work out, we'll pay him off anyway. But don't tell the public that." So he was a bit of a conniver. But then again, he was a politician. So there you go. But anyway, that started the Barbary War, and that was an unusual way of dealing with the pirates back then. Most countries just paid them because it was cheaper and it got them off your back, and then they'd leave you alone for a couple of years. Then they'd get bored with the payments and they'd be like, well, let's renegotiate, and they'd seize a few more ships. We decided to fight them, and it was kind of a mess the first couple of years. But then, I plan to chronicle that war, and it's a very romantic period because it was literally charging onto the decks. This is back in the day when a captain of a fighting ship was expected to charge onto the decks with his men, with a sword in hand, and literally fight. So Master and Commander is kind of if you've seen that film, that's actually almost the exact era of my book. And so that
it would be 1805 is for the movie. So
yeah, it's basically the exact, because my book takes place in 1805. So it's roughly exactly the same as Master and Commander. It's a great era. So that's pretty much kind of what it is. And the thing is, I love Master and Commander. I could watch it all day long. I did think it could have been more exciting. And this is the other motivation for me as a writer, is I see movies and I'm like, but wouldn't it be better if there was more this or more that? And for me, it's like more sword fights, more high stakes, more adventure. And so I deliberately put that in there, and I try to be as faithful to history as possible. But I also...
historical accuracy, but that requires responsibility on the writer.
Yeah.
I'm scared, says Ridley Scott, most likely.
I mean, historical accuracy from an ethical point of view, yes, that's important because I don't want to make up bullshit, but I just find history is the best story. It really is. So my desire to preserve history is just natural. I just find that it would be less interesting to just make up bullshit. It's much more interesting to show you what would it really be like to be a slave on the Barbary Coast and how awful would that be. And, yes, the lesser of two weevils. I know, Fu Manflu, I know. It's the best joke ever. I know.
You can use that joke because apparently nobody remembers the movie except us free here in the chat. Actually, I think most of the chat knows about it.
It's also a problem that we don't suffer from in the modern weevils in our bread. Yeah, it's so... Anyway, yeah, the interesting thing that's always happened to me is when I got stuck on a part writing this book, I would occasionally hit a patch where I'm like, I have no idea what to do here. And I'd spin my wheels for a couple of weeks and I'd be like, I don't know what to do. And then finally I would do what I needed to do, which is go read the history more and just start digging in. And then for a while, I'd still kind of struggle with it. And then the light bulb would come on. Oh my gosh, this is great. I could have a character that did this. And that's because I read the history and found something in it that was fascinating and interesting and fun. And then the wheels start turning and then bam. And then I'd write more of the chapters. So it's not even just that I wanted to preserve history. It's that I couldn't have written the story without it because I needed inspiration. It's like, what could have, and specifically what happens to his sister? That was one of the hardest parts to write. Because she's out there, but where's she been? What's she been doing? And that was a very difficult question to answer. And I didn't answer it until I went to the history and kept reading and reading and reading about what the experience of Barbary slaves was. And then I hit upon something that was like, wow, that is fascinating and so much fun. That could be a movie on its own. And then I knew, I'm like, okay, I know exactly what she's been doing. And it worked out great.
Now, I have to ask about a particular set piece in your book. Now, granted, again, I have yet to read this, so we're going to try to stay non-spoiler because perhaps in the future we can have Captain Garrett back on here and then we can have a spoiler deep dive for those that have read it. But until then, I noticed a certain ship on the cover. The USS Philadelphia.
You noticed that, did you? You are a man who knows his history. Very good.
Perhaps, is this the same Philadelphia that met an unsavory end off of the harbor of Tripoli?
Yes, it was. Yes, you spotted correctly. There was a very specific reason I chose that ship. Now, I must mention both books take place in 1803. And the historical event you're probably thinking of takes place in 1805. So I can safely spoil that we're not there yet,
Yet.
but we are on the real historical USS Philadelphia, and the captain is Captain William Bainbridge, and it was very fun writing his character also because I read so much about the real historical Bainbridge, and I was like, I want to be as fair to, I have my own opinion of this character, this man, this real life man, and but I want to be fair to him, as much as I can. So I read as much as I could about his history, and I was like, okay, I'll take some liberties, but I'll do as faithful an interpretation of his character as who I think he was as I can. And history records that he was a captain who acted with distinction and did his duty well. But I think if you read between the lines of history, I don't think he was a particularly good leader. I think he was a very bad leader. And I liked the idea that John is forced to serve under a captain who is a bad captain. Not the worst captain in the world, but he's mediocre. He's just not a great captain. And he clashes with John's personality because John is all about the mission, his personal mission, and doing the right thing at all costs. And Bainbridge, and this is based on my historical research, is all about duty, honor, and appearances. And that is the opposite of what John Sullivan cares about. But also John Sullivan is a man who needs a mentor. He desperately needs a mentor because he's kind of off the reservation a lot of the time. So now there's another historical character in history named Stephen Decatur, who was a real life badass, like a true lead by example hero. He was a real life Commander Shepard, in my view. He was a real life Commander Shepard. I'm not kidding. He led brave missions himself. He was great with a sword. He was excellent as a fighter. He was a masterful commander, and he wound up an admiral in the War of 1812. And so my kind of plan is that both Bainbridge and Decatur will factor into John's story. It's funny. It's not like John is a fictional character, and his immediate circle are all fictional characters. However, there are a lot of historically real characters in this book, like the pirate Pierre Lafitte is in it. He was a real character. Whenever I could include a real historical figure, I did, and I always tried to be as faithful to them and interpret who their personality would be. Like, for example, with Bainbridge, I was trying to interpret, like, I don't know as much as I want to know about his life, but I do know that, like, he famously got the signature. He was very proud of getting an autograph by his favorite stage actor. He loved the theater. He was big into plays. When he was in captivity on the Barbary Coast, he would put on Shakespearean plays with his officers.
Oh my God.
They would all... So when I was writing the scene of what his cabin looks like, I made sure to include that there's like an autographed copy of a playbill from that theater, which was the real play that he liked historically. I made sure to include that he's got like some musical, what's the word I'm looking for? Like actual musical score from a Bach play or a Bach symphony that he had. So I basically drew from like what I knew of his real life personality, and I just extrapolated that to what might his cabin be decorated with. So little things like that.
I love that. It's the little details that definitely take this from being a two-dimensional person that's in a black and white boring textbook, and it's like, oh my God, this is a real person. They lived. Like this whole, just mentioning that this guy has an autograph for this famous, stage player. And it's like, how many people today, go after and seek out autographs, and I'm like, that's their most coveted possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, it's very fascinating the life that a captain in this day of a frigate would have. And Fu Man Blue says John and the captain both cared a lot about duty, but John's duty was to his family and not a captain. It's like, yeah, exactly. And that's part of John's journey as a character is he's got to learn lessons as he goes through the story. And that's part of his arc as well. But he just happened to find a bad teacher in Bainbridge who kind of sets up a kind of rivalry with him. And so it's an important factor. But like, um, I just really I wanted to create as much as I could. There was a little there's one event that happens in the novel that's actually an important little thing that does happen that gets John in trouble, and it's there's an officer. This is a real historical event that happened. There's an officer sleeping on the deck, an old seaman, and one of the young midshipmen who were totally out of control on that ship. Like that was well documented that he ran actually kind of bad officers. He really did. So the midshipmen, if you don't know, are like, which you would certainly know, are like, they could be as young as 10 years old in those days. They are officers in training. But the way they were on Bainbridge's ship is they were out of control. They were being little brats, and he was not, and they're supposed to be learning to be gentlemen, right? And so by the standards of the time, Bainbridge was doing a bad job with these boys. Well, one of them threw a bucket of water on a sleeping seaman who was sleeping on the deck, they call the spar deck, which is the open top deck. And the sailor was so startled he didn't know who he was talking to. Oh, what the fuck? And he basically ranted a bunch of profanity. Then he looked up and saw that it was an officer, right? Because even though it's a 12-year-old boy, to him, that is an officer. And back in those days, punishments for insubordination were not a talking to. It was severe. It was severe. Well, before he could catch himself, he kind of apologized. Bainbridge happened to be walking by, and literally I put the exact quote that he said in my novel verbatim from history, and it was like, "You dare speak to an officer of my ship that way? I'll cut you into ounce pieces, you scoundrel." He had that seaman trussed up and flogged for that.
Oh my God.
Well, when I read that historical thing, I said, that's going in the book. But I sort of in my novel, I sort of recontextualize it as, okay, and then how does John experience that event? How do these characters experience that event? And so that character, the seaman, becomes a kind of supporting character in John's story. I call him Matthew Meadows is his name. And he's probably going to be a recurring character because he's kind of that perfect old salt. He's not an officer mentor, but he's kind of just like an older mentor for John, which I really like. So
now I do have that's the more that you talk about certain pieces in Blood and Oak. Obviously, you said how Master and Commander is a big influence on producing this book. Did the tale of the Mutiny of the Bounty, by any chance, have inspiration?
Yes, I read all 3 of those books when I was in high school. I loved those books. I read Mutiny on the Bounty, Men Against the Sea, which is an absolute true story, and Pitcairn's Island, also a true story. Unbelievable true stories, by the way. Oh, awesome books. In fact, the second book was actually kind of the most interesting of the 3, because in Mutiny on the Bounty, there's a fictional protagonist who kind of is the way that we see the story of Captain Bligh being this kind of monstrous tyrant. And history does debate this. British naval history is not settled on whether he really was a tyrant or not. In their view, the official record says, he was harsh, but that's life. That's Navy life. Nothing he did was really all that over the line. But the book posits that he was a malicious tyrant. So, anyway, the second book is about when Bligh gets put off the ship into an open boat with his loyal officers and seamen. He is stranded in the South Pacific Ocean, and he has to get back. He can't get all the way back to England, so he sets a course to the Dutch East Indies, I believe. Or is it? No, the Dutch. Was it the Dutch West Indies? Basically sets for one of the Dutch colonies in the Pacific.
Yeah, he set in for like an island or one of their colonies in the South Pacific Ocean, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And then his idea was to get to the Dutch colony and then through the embassy get help from Britain to apprehend the mutineers. Not to survive, to apprehend the mutineers, those bastards.
For the record, what the captain is speaking about, this is all true, by the way. This is a real life event that happened. Arguably, it's one of the biggest feats of survival in human history. Somehow they survived.
Yeah, he went something like 3,000 miles in an open boat. He faced cannibals because there were cannibal islanders that would eat people. A lot of them were peaceful. Like the Tahitians in Tahiti, they were very peaceful, nice people. Everyone loved hanging out with them, especially the ladies. They were they were wonderful. But there were other islands where there were some dangerous, nasty cannibal types that would eat you. So there were storms that could sink a full-blown ship that he survived in an open boat. They were living off of almost nothing to eat for months, and it should have been absolute death. But Bly, who in the first book he's this total tyrant, in the second book he is also a total tyrant. But also being a total tyrant, he is able to get all of his men to safety. And he finally gets, this truly happened in history, by the way. He gets to the port in the Dutch islands, and he literally starving. His uniform is torn to shreds. He is sunburned. He is literally barely alive. He staggers out of the boat. He walks straight to the embassy. This is recorded in history. He says, my name is Captain William Bly of the HMS Bounty, and I need to report a mutiny. Like, that's unbelievable, man. So what I love about that is when I read the first book, I was like, I hate Bly. He's evil. He's a bad guy. He's a tyrant. Then in the second book, written by the same authors, it continues that he's the same character. He's not a different man in the second book. But I wind up seeing him differently. I'm like, yes, he's a tyrant, also saved the lives of everyone on that ship because the man refused to quit. He refused to give up. Those are very noble qualities, very heroic qualities. And I think that was a very good lesson for me early as a writer, that, like, you know, to just assume a character is all one thing is always a mistake, and it will lead to shitty writing. It's like, no, Bly, on one hand, was mean and cruel to men that he didn't get along with on the ship. On the other hand, he, you know, all those men that survived that trip because of him loved and worshipped him for the rest of his life, and rightfully so. So that's the complexity of human nature. And it's like, so I really love, like, I think if you watch, I really don't enjoy the fact that so much of what we have is garbage. I really don't. Like, I don't enjoy the fact that Ahsoka's garbage. I just don't. I'd rather Star Wars was amazing and grand and beautiful and everyone loved it, rightfully loved it, because the reality is, like, in Ahsoka, every character is one-dimensional, right? And this is so typical these days. It's like these characters, Argyle, they're just one-dimensional characters, and it's so boring. And the worst thing about the woke mind virus is that it sees humanity this way. The woke mind virus sees human beings as one-dimensional. You are a privileged white male. You are a stunning, brave POC woman of color. You know, it sees Echo, the character of Echo. You are a powerful, stunning, and brave one-legged, survivor. It's like, but that's all she is. That's all she is to the woke mind virus. And villains are the same. Like that, there was that awful, awful show, Lovecraft
They're stunning
Country.
and brave, even though they haven't done anything stunning and brave.
Yeah, like that's why these characters are so morally twisted too, because it's like, oh, you are a victim, but have achieved power. You are now good. No, that's not how morality works. Just being someone who was oppressed, who now has power, that doesn't make you a good person. Some of the best all the best villains started as oppressed people, who then used that. You know, they had the Kingpin. His father was abusive. He lived a life of victimhood. That doesn't mean he's a good guy now that he's the Kingpin. He's evil. So yeah, I just think that's why wokeness is so awful, because it sees people only as their race, only as their sexuality. It only sees them as how they serve the message. And that's why they write bad characters, because characters that are one-dimensional are not larger than life. They're not interesting. They're not fun. Star Wars needs larger than life characters. That is, of all the things Star Wars needs the most, it must have larger than life characters. Han Solo is larger than life. Princess Leia is larger than life. Luke, he's not quite larger than life, but he gets there. He doesn't start out as larger than life. He's kind of the everyman in the first film, whereas Han Solo and Leia and Obi-Wan are really interesting, larger than life characters. Darth Vader, of course. Luke only becomes larger than life because he's on an adventure, and then later he becomes the wise Jedi and everything. Woke can't write that. Because they would see Bly.
Break
sorry, last point. Sorry.
No,
they would see a character like Bly, and they would say, "Oh, that makes sense. He was a privileged white male in the 1700s. He was bad." It's like, what a mistake that would be. Because yes, he had bad qualities, but he also was an amazing survivor who led his men to survival. That's a praiseworthy quality. They're not capable of seeing people in that multidimensional light, which is what is necessary for good storytelling. So,
well, I mean, this brings it all back. They break these rules in storytelling, which you have eloquently every week on your streams established with Save the Cat, probably your favorite book ever written.
Yeah, I probably use it. I probably use it too much. I will admit that. I probably do. But it is great. I just like that framework.
But there's these rules that for centuries, and yes, centuries, have been used in storytelling. And now all of a sudden they think, oh, those we're better than that. We're going to break it. And here's the thing that drives me insane. You just recap the tale of the Mutiny on the Bounty, a real life story, and it matches all of these rules in storytelling, a real life event.
That's the dirty little secret. Stories are a reflection of the human condition and the human experience. And the human experience is not cut and dried. It's not black and white. It's not that simple. You know, and if anything, wokeness is an oversimplification of humanity. It just oversimplifies all of the human experience, and that's not reasonable. It's like I'm always amazed that whenever I've taken a new job, the job is a thing. It's a thing I have thoughts about, but then I get there and I start working with people who are at that job, and then I meet those people, and then I hear about their lives. And you suddenly discover that like every human being is interesting. Every human being has little things about them that surprise you all the time. And you suddenly realize just how deep and complex people are, even when they may not seem that way on the surface. And the true artist listens more than they speak, I think, which is probably sounds counterproductive given my situation. but they listen. They truly do. Like, and I find that I love listening to people. You know, and not always. Sometimes I'm like, these people are annoying. This person is annoying me. But then I'm like, wait a minute. Listen. Actually listen. And then you start to actually hear people's inner lives in their conversations and who they are and what they're concerned about. And you suddenly realize that we're not all these black and white categories that people want to put us in. And as a writer, your job is to find that in your fictional characters. You know, no villain is one of the reasons Darth Vader is so compelling when you really think about it. Going back to the original trilogy, in the first film, he's just all one-dimensional bad. He's just bad. Darth Vader shows up, it's bad news, folks. That's it. He's just there to be evil and undefeatable. Second film, Empire Strikes Back, my favorite. It turns out it's not that simple. Turns out, well, we do know that he betrayed Luke's father and murdered Luke's father. Then Luke confronts him to get sort of revenge for his father. But then we find out it is his father he's fighting. Uh-oh. Now Luke is in conflict because do I want to keep fighting him? He's my father. It's almost like his father was dead and now his father's alive. Yes, he's like the worst thing ever because he's the master of evil, as that Ahsoka 80s trailer puts it, and I love that. He's the master of evil. Now what do I do? And that is more like real life to me than just the one-dimensional villain. And that's why Vader is such a fascinating character, because he's got two poles, opposite poles in his personality. He is father who loves his son, once great Jedi, and ruthless Machiavellian evil plotter. That's so much more interesting than just he's a bad guy who's good with a lightsaber. That's why the shills are so dumb, because they don't know that that's what they're missing.
At what point, I mean, I'm sure you've answered this before, but at what point do you feel you became aware of this culture war? And here's what I'll say first, because I've asked this several times in the Gilded that we're all part of with A Drink with Crazy. And I said, I first became exposed to this idea of a culture war that, wait a minute, I'm not crazy that this stuff is bad. It's two events. One in 2014, Little Readout Productions, who watched Civil War Journal 7 a.m. in the morning rather than watch Pokemon. Well, I watched Pokemon first, then I watched Civil War Journal. I was a weird kid. Anyways, little old Readout
That's pretty
Production.
weird too. I
You
loved
know,
Underdog.
I think we're all weird on this chat. I think we're.
Yeah.
I'm watching Legend of Korra, the sequel to my favorite show of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I was not a fan of this shipping thing that was going on in the fan community, and I didn't like that they end the show by pairing Korra and Asami because I said I never liked Asami's character. I found her dry, dull, boring. Just this is just not a good character, and I feel this was done just to appease a fragment of the internet. And then I was completely hated upon the next day at school, saying, "You don't understand. This is groundbreaking." And I'm like, this doesn't make sense as a relationship. This is stupid. And this franchise has always sucked at writing romances, has a history of bad romance writing, and here we go again. You don't understand. Okay, I felt a little weird there. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll shut up. Maybe I'm stupid. Yeah, 2 years later it would have been certain monstrosity ensued, known as the 2016 remake of Ghostbusters.
I
And
know.
I had this reaction. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a chance. And I came out and I even said, I'm like, eh, it ain't worth the hate that people are having. I hate that they made it to begin with. Why do we need to remake something that's near perfect? But also I'm like, this is so boring. I'm like, I can't even get angry. It's so boring. And then I was really, when I was exposed to the fissure, they could say that's happening in in the world landscape, where everybody was like, this is the greatest thing ever and you must love it, and this is the worst thing ever and you must hate it. I'm just like, what the heck is going on? That long-winded story is how I became exposed to this idea of a culture war. But everybody's told me, no, this has been going on for decades before, and you're just now, that was just you just waking up to it. So that's why I asked you,
You may
where
not
do
like
you...
my answer on this, but
I'll take it.
I've always known there's a culture war. There always has been since I've been alive, because I don't know. Listen, everyone is entitled to their political views, and I'm fine with that. I am okay with the social contract of democracy, which is we disagree, we vote, and the votes decide. I am okay with that arrangement. I am not okay with people who are not okay with that arrangement, right? The modern left wing, despite all their protestations to the contrary, they hate that arrangement. They hate it that Trump supporters get to vote for Trump. They hate that. But they hated George Bush supporters. They hated John McCain supporters. They hated Mitt Romney supporters. They hated Reagan. They hated Reagan. They hated Margaret Thatcher. They hated her. They have always hated. So what I'm saying is left-wing, I'm just being frank with you. Left-wing lunatics have always been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for this stuff. And they have always been... Now, generally, I think there's been a wing of left-wing people, like I would call them classical liberals. Reagan was a liberal. Ronald Reagan started as a liberal in the 60s. That is a classical liberal. The word liberal dates back to ancient Greece, meaning someone who supports liberty. The modern iteration of true liberalism is libertarianism, believing in individual liberty and dignity and rights. Right now, during the Reagan years, they called him a warmonger. They said he was going to start World War III with the Russians because the policies of appeasement had not worked. But it turned out that Reagan's policies generally bankrupted the Soviet Union because he argued always. Look up his quotes. He was always arguing for peace. But what he said is the way to get the right peace is not to surrender. If we surrender, we're slaves. There's a way to get peace without war, but we have to work for it. And we got to show that if they want to rumble, they will lose. We'll all lose, but they won't win. It's basically what his point was. And ultimately, I think his and Thatcher's policies bore out. I'm saying that because I grew up in a household that was they leaned conservative. I've always been, I'm from rural areas. I've always been around conservative people, but I wouldn't call them like crazy political. In fact, a lot of my family didn't really like politics, but my parents started as Democrats in the 80s. Then they started a business. And when they discovered that, like, it did, if you're a business owner and you're underwater, too bad. Like, you're still going to pay your taxes, you're still going to pay your people. And I'm not saying you shouldn't pay your people, but when you're an employee, there's protections for you. When you're an employer, the government doesn't care. They just want their cut. And that changed their minds. Like, why am I voting for these Democrats? They're not helping me. And so then they kind of became Republicans. But then as I grew up, I remember my first election I could vote in was, I think was it the 2000 election between Bush and Gore? I think I was able to vote. I can't remember, honestly. I really can't. It's too long. But I do remember that, like, I supported Bush at that time. And that's just because, Gore was a leftist. He was a wacko. He believed all this green nonsense back then. He believed all that stuff. Their policies always were less liberty for everybody. It was always more taxes, more rules, more laws, more regulations on every business. And it's just a fundamental philosophy that I did not agree with. My best civics teacher was a guy who was a liberal who voted for Gore in high school. And I just remember that, but he presented civics brilliantly. If I am a libertarian today, it's because of him. And he was a liberal because he explained the bicameral legislature. He explained the separation of powers, the Constitution. I loved that course. Was like a TV show to me. I drank it in. I aced his test without even studying. I loved it so much. He instilled in me a fundamental belief in the structures of Republican, that's small r, not the party, but the political governing system, Republican democracy. Because we're not a true democracy. We are a republic. And in a republic, the people don't always get their say. There are laws that override the people. That is the Constitution. You cannot vote away freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is not up for a vote. That's a fundamental human right, and it's protected by the Constitution. So a representative republic, all those systems. And then what I saw was people who claim to love those systems, that would be, now I think it's a misnomer, but liberals, but generally it's left-wing loons, who always were arguing for something that would undermine that. They were always arguing for more power for the president. They were always arguing for more taxes on small businesses. They were always arguing for crazy social policies that other people didn't want. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like the system that I've come to love. So now I see that the Republicans have been a giant part of the problem also. They have also been a giant part of the problem. So I kind of used to listen to Rush Limbaugh back in the early 2000s. He articulated all the stuff Joe Rogan and Bill Maher, all the things those guys are saying. Oh my God, these left-wing loons, they're so bad. Elon Musk, he's out there saying, like, these people are crazy. Rush was saying all that stuff 20 years ago. He knew all of this was happening, but he was focused on the politics. And what I think has changed is now the culture is waking up to, like, oh, this is how we got here. So I'm sorry, I probably went on too long, but my view is what I did realize was I wasn't alone, and I realized that only a few years ago, kind of when I discovered this sphere, because I lived in LA for a while and I was alone.
And I'm just going to interject real quickly, because what you're about to say is it's going to be a bit of a repeat from your early stream, but it's actually something I really like that you said, because I related exactly. So continue.
Oh yeah, and thanks for the super chat, Fuman Blue, $10 super sticker. Awesome. Support Redoubt Productions. Beautiful. Awesome. So yes, melodic method, uniparty. I really love what Dr. Steve Turley says. He's like, we've had a political shift. It was red versus blue, Democrats versus Republican for years, and that was a mistake. Because what we've learned is it's actually we the people versus a ruling class. And it's funny, I was in a store last year, I think it was, and My mom has turned into she's crazy now. She used to not be at all political. Now she's bending everyone's ear about politics because she's so on
You
fire.
do not realize how much I know relate.
Yeah, it's so I was in like a Staples, and this was right after COVID, and I'm just trying to get something, I'm in the store to get something, and she starts bending the guy's ear about all the bullshit about the coof, and he was literally just repeating all the things the media say, and it's like I've reached a point in my life where I'm not really interested in debating with people over that. Like if it's in a public forum and it's like I'm having a debate, that's one thing because there's a benefit to that. But she was just really worked up about it. And I'm like, I don't really get worked up about that. I'm like, mom, he's a blue pill. There's nothing we can do. That's it. He's a blue pill. He's plugged into the matrix. Nothing we can do for him right now. It's like a survival concept. Like leave them where they fall for now. We got to save who we can. So I think we are building a grand alliance of liberals, moderates, libertarians, you name it.
And Maji is trying to find a way to get me to shout in my house at 10 o'clock at night. Tell Readout that the musical Hamilton is historically accurate for fun. Don't get me started. Don't get me started, Maji.
I don't have a problem with people. You were saying like they make these dumb woke projects that nobody likes. I don't have a problem with them making that. Like Barbie, I don't have a problem with Barbie. Barbie's 100% a-okay in my book. It is a miserable, depressing, awful film that is incoherent. It is an incoherent, unhinged feminist tirade that doesn't even make sense, even by feminist standards, And I'm fine with that because I'm fine with the marketplace of ideas. It's them that are not fine with the marketplace of ideas. The guy that I was talking about on my stream that criticized Ripa and the Ripaverse, he's saying like Eric is gatekeeping and he's blacklisted. No, he isn't. They're the ones doing that. If you don't like what Eric does and you don't buy Eric's comic, he ain't going to try and get your channel struck. He's not going to try and get the dislike button removed. He's never going to come after you. He's fine with that. And if they were fine with that, they meaning wokies, Hollywood, the mainstream media, that whole sphere, if George R.R. Martin, if they were fine with that bargain, what we would have is a true democracy. A true democracy. Let the best ideas succeed. If there's an audience for every weird, fan fiction out there, there's an audience for that. It might be a small micro audience, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What is the problem is they don't want that social contract. They want a social contract in which all of their ideas get to win. And if we disagree, we shut the hell up by force if necessary. That's authoritarianism. That's evil. And I oppose, in the words of the Vedic in Deep Space Nine, evil must be opposed. It must be opposed. I do not want to have a political nerd channel. I don't. It's like my dad was like, "You're really hitting the politics." I'm like, "No, Dad. The politics are hitting us. I don't want to talk about politics in Marvel. Believe me, it was my favorite thing about the early MCU is that I had friends who were, most of them liberals, would go with me to the movies. They were different races, different walks of life. We'd all go to the movie and we would have a shared experience of like, oh my God, Tony Stark versus Cap. That was amazing. I want to see it again. Oh my God, Black Panther. Who's he? He came out of nowhere. He was so cool. That's all we talked about. They chose to make this a fight over the freedom to tell the story we want to tell. They're fine with having Barbie, but they're not okay. They're not okay with us having Captain America just be the Steve Rogers of the comics. They're not okay with that because male and pale is stale, which is a racist statement. And by their own standards, that should be evil. But they don't have standards. And so my issue is this, like, I'm not just going to sit around and let them get away with this anymore. Like, I've chosen to fight and I will fight until, and this ends when they stop, right? The day that the wokies stop trying to silence us and take our channels down and lie and call us racist and have us fired from jobs and all that stuff, and the day they stop, this stops. It's up to them, not me. It's not up to me. It's not up to us. We're acting in self-defense. Don't ever let them talk you into the opposite. Don't ever let them convince you that we are acting in aggression. We're not. They always do. Right-wing trolls pounced on the Marvel. No, we didn't. You know we didn't. You are the idiots that put black girl magic as a line in the movie, you dumb idiots. Like, you put that in there. We did not start anything. We never once even talked about Nick Fury's race. Nobody was talking about Nick Fury's race. We did not open that door. You did. We are acting in self-defense. You said Doctor Who belongs to us now, and now he's going to talk about pronouns with aliens. You started that. We are the ones that responded and said, we don't like this. This is not correct. This is not the way it's supposed to go. This isn't the story you've told. So we are acting in self-defense, and people, free people acting in their own defense, stop aggression when the aggression stops. And, you know, at the end of World War II, if the Axis had won in World War II, they would never have stopped. There would have been another race to exterminate tomorrow. If they got every Jew in the world, they would have moved on to the next target. That's how authoritarians work. They're never done. The violence is never over with an authoritarian. There's always another political enemy to put in a concentration camp. There's always another territory you need to conquer. When we took over Germany and Japan, we nourished their democracies back to health, and we left.
With at least in Germany, one of the biggest, I guess you want to say one of the biggest, I can't even think the word I want to use. We pulled the Berlin airlift, which was one of the biggest pull-ups any country ever did before, to basically show off in a good way.
Yes. That was important. Like, that was a very, very skillful political maneuvering by Dwight Eisenhower, who was a brilliant leader. He really was.
Look at our infrastructure. Look what we can do. We can do the impossible and sustain it. That was essentially what they were trying to say.
And Mashi-chan says, Samuel L. Jackson made an awesome Fury. The current Nick would have been shot by Fury 10 years ago. I know, like it's like the House of the Dragon thing. There was the thing about, what's the house where they had, like, essentially it was a kind of a soft race swap, as I understand it, because I know the house was supposed to have been from another region. But they just made a big deal about, it's a black Westerosi house, and all the fans are going to hate it. But then it turned out that they were complex, interesting characters. It was
people care about the personality of a person rather than their superficial qualities. Hark.
Yeah, and also they fit into the world. There was backstory that made sense, that they were a house from across the sea. They've been founded by this ambitious guy. I just cannot remember his name.
I'm going to be quite honest. I can't help you. I haven't seen House of the Dragon.
Pulling it up right now. Let's see, there was Alicent, Masseria, Cole. I'll know it when I see it. Laris. There's so many names. Up a Game of Thrones list,
and
they all sound the same. They've all got like 5 Y's in them.
Yeah. Yep. Damn it. It sounds so mystical if we add multiple Y's and make it 15 syllables long.
Driftmark. It's got to be in there somewhere. Oh my God, it's killing me. IMDb. I just hate. I used to be so much better. My memory retention is not what it used to be. Because when I was like 20, I never forgot a character name if I liked them. Now it's like, oh my God, I got to get the neurons.
We can test this out. Garrett, what'd you have for lunch today?
I have not had lunch because I've been streaming all day. I had a big breakfast.
Oh God.
I'm good. I'm good to go. I've had 5 cups of coffee, so I am ready for for whatever. I really hate the new IMDb, by the way.
It's pretty
Corlys. Lord Corlys. That's right. But it's because all of the names in the Song of Ice and Fire, they all sound the same because his name is Valerian. Lord Corlys, the Seasake Valerian, which sounds similar to Targaryen, which sounds similar to Valyrian steel. I'm like, I can't keep, so it's hard to separate.
Martin, come on.
Yeah, so you had Steve Toussaint, who played Lord Corlys, okay? He's a black guy, right? And in the established visual presentation of Westeros, it's presented as a rough, mostly European country. So it's like mostly we're expecting not to see people with darker skin tones until we get to Dorne, right? But then he's in the show. His house has a good foundation in the backstory of where they come from originally. He's a great character. He's complex. He's interesting. There's no mention of racial bullshit in the story. It all just fits. It makes sense. The show's good. And so suddenly, where's all the racist fans who hate this kid? They're nowhere. They just melted away as if they never existed because they didn't. It's like, so they use that as a shield, and it's not reality. And the thing is, I've said this so many times, it is such a lie that there's this weird segment of nerds who hate diversity. That's like they stole our homework and now they're taking credit and saying that we didn't do this homework. It's like, dude, we nerds are the pioneers of diversity in storytelling. We are the pioneers. We are the ones that say, what if? We are the ones that say, what if in the future, on a mission where space truckers are just hauling through space, the first officer is a woman named Ellen Ripley? What if the warrior who trained John Connor to beat the machines was actually his mother, not his father? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? What if there's a future in which the Enterprise is equally populated by men and women? There's no, what if there's a future where we don't even see race anymore? We just don't even see it. Hello, Star Trek. It's like, and then we explore even deeper. What if there's aliens out there? What would that be like? Would we be suspicious of them at first? Could we learn to coexist with them? What would be some of the problems with that? So we are the dreamers. We are the ones that look up and say, what if? We're the ones that want to see interesting twists on old tropes. We're the ones that are like, what if there's Conan the Barbarian, but then there's this other badass chick named Red Sonja, and she's super hot. Like we're the. By the way, that story always ends with, and they're super hot. That's basically green aliens, women on the Enterprise, short skirts, also super hot. Like, we're the nerds, right? Like, because we didn't, we weren't the popular kids, so naturally we wanted to dream about hot babes in space. That was but then they stole all our stuff. And then they put a chick in it, made her gay, and they did all this other weird shit. And then we're like, hey, what'd you ruin all that for? Like, well, you just hate that there's women in it, don't you? No. We put women in comics. We wanted Wonder Woman. We wanted all the hot female characters in comics. We wanted that. That was us nerds who wanted that for years. So it's just stupid. It's just a stupid lie that they perpetuate.
Now, I have a couple questions, short ones I need to ask you. And these are very, very important questions. Like, what's your favorite theatrical adaptation of The Bounty Story?
I don't think I've only seen the one with Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson.
Okay, you haven't seen the Marlon Brando one then. Okay.
I did not. No, I've not. I did not.
I've seen the Anthony one, so
it's not bad. I mean, it's fine. The book is just so much deeper and richer, and the book there's a fictional protagonist that you see the whole story through, and he has a really great story. He falls in love with a Tahitian woman, and there's like that book paints Tahiti as total paradise. And if you were a sailor back then, it would have been an absolute paradise. Kind of an interesting thing too is like native cultures back in those days, the one thing that is a fair critique of Western civilization is that it developed a very life is work mindset. It developed, especially early American culture, developed. The Puritans were part of this. It's like life is suffering, life is work, life is pain, and there's elements of truth in that. The funny thing is that when European settlers encountered Native American nations, they often discovered that their mindset was so different. They just had a different, they're like, we don't understand these whites. They're always wanting things. They're never happy. They're never satisfied. And what's interesting is when they often would kidnap settlers, most Native American tribes, at least on the East Coast, had a policy of just adopting them into the tribe and sort of making assimilating them into it. The funny thing was, oftentimes, and of course, European settlers would sometimes abduct natives. The interesting thing is, the natives always wanted to go back to their tribes, but often when the European settlers would like recapture someone that had been abducted, they'd want to go back to the tribe. A European, they'd be like, I want to stay with them.
Yeah, they had a situation at the end of Pontiac's War in 1764, and one of the terms were that the British Empire requesting these captives back, and the tribes basically went, well, it's going to be a problem because a lot of these people have lived with us for at least a decade and they've been fully assimilated. You're basically going to be taking them from their families. And even there were some people in the British Isles going, like, yeah, I don't think we can, do this. Nope, we got to do it anyways, policy. So there were people that actually went out and will try to track down these captives to try to take them back for basically for the ransom back to the the colonial cities and stuff. And it was like these people are basically begging him, like, look, we want to stay with the tribe because we don't like what happened to us, but we don't know another life now.
Yeah, I mean, Eckhart Tolle, if you've read any of his books, his theory is that the Native Americans they had their life was not constantly governed by the future and the past. They lived in the present more. They were, and I just think that's probably true of all cultures at essentially a Stone Age level of technology. It's like they live in they don't, Europeans and probably Eastern cultures as well at that time were obsessed with records and dates and calendars and, things. And Native Americans were they just were more about, daily life. And that to some people was appealing. And the same was true of Pacific Islanders. It's like, here come, the British Navy was a very harsh and ruthless order. Some of that was by necessity. It's like it looks flogging looks pretty terrible from our perspective in modern times. But we also live in the benefit of a time where there's like radio communications and satellite communications. And you could have a guy on the other side of the world who's scheduled for a court martial in Washington in a week and he's shipped back. Back in those days, a ship at sea, that was it. There was no home base to radio. If the crew got unruly, if order was not restored, it was over for that captain. And so it's like there could be no room for dissent in the ranks. That, like, mutiny, it's funny. It's like mutiny definitely happened back in those days, but it like even the whiff of mutiny was like absolutely crushed on those ships. Like nobody effed around with mutinous talk very often because you were going to get your ass flogged. And part of that was by necessity because you're all you've got out there in the ocean back in those days. So imagine going from that harsh culture, eating bad food, drinking stinking water, constant brutal discipline. A lot of these sailors were pressed into service. They wouldn't even be allowed to go home and see their families when they were in port because of fear of desertion. They stumble on these Native Pacific Islanders, and they are welcoming. They have an attitude of like living in the present. Life is just living in total presence. They're not worried about tomorrow. They're not worried about yesterday. They go about their lives on a daily basis. They're loving and open. They're not suspicious of outsiders, which is part of their downfall. And they welcome these weary, tired sailors into this tropical paradise. It was like, we don't want to leave. Like, we do not want to leave this place ever. And who could blame them? It was like so Captain Bligh, from a strictly historical perspective, had a kind of serious problem, which is that how is he going to get these men to come back from the beaches and get back to real life? That's actually why I think Avatar, the first film, it kind of mirrors that exact thing. I think that's one of the reasons I like that movie so much. And the novel captured that in a way the movie did not for me. But the book, Mutiny on the Bounty, was very much kind of like Avatar. Jake Sully goes out there, he gets immersed in paradise, and when he comes back to the real world, he's like, I don't want to go back. And it's like, that's really the experience that the sailors on the Bounty had with Tahiti.
I've never thought of Avatar like that. Because I'm going to be quite honest, I've never been the biggest fan of that movie. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't think there was anything wrong with the original movie. I think it could be preachy in some areas, but in most parts, I'm like, it's technically flawless. It's, literal technical aspects of it. It still looks like a beautiful picture. But yeah, I've never really thought about that, paralleling
I
it to
think
like the Boutney situation. Actually, it makes me reconsider a lot of what I think of that movie, because normally I see it as, and I still think this may be how Hollywood depicts it. This is the colonizers coming to the indigenous tribes, but in space, like in North America, but in space. But now when you think of it more of an isolated story, it's like there's a lot more nuance all of a sudden that's added in.
mutiny. It's fun. No, Fu Manchu, that will not be tolerated here. No, sir. There will be no talk of no mutinous talk aboard this ship. Anyway, but
I don't know. There might
you
be.
can tell I've always liked nautical stories because I've adopted. Yeah, Fu Manchu. No, well, I love Avatar because of the immersion. Like, I was totally immersed. I was one of these weirdos that was like depressed for 3 weeks after leaving the theater. I was like, I want to go back. I was like depressed. I was like, because he did create such an immersive world in that movie that was amazing. And Jake Sully's story, although a bit thin, it's pretty good for the most part. I mean, honest to God, stack Jake Sully as a character up against, is he the best character ever? No. Is he going to compare to like Luke Skywalker? No. But if you stack him up against most male heroes in modern storytelling, like it's
Yeah,
night and
yeah.
day. He's a man on a classic Epic of Gilgamesh monomyth. He goes into the strange world. He goes on this adventure. He learns all these skills. It's an institutionalized story, basically. He has to decide whether he's going to stick with his institution or join theirs and burn down the human institution, which is what he does. So
Yeah.
I like it for those reasons. And the critiques of it are fair.
But
Quaritch,
he kills Stonewall Jackson. That's
you know,
that's
I
irredeemable.
love Stephen Lang as Quaritch is a
Yeah,
great character.
he is
He's
my
a
favorite
big
part of the movie, for the
yes.
record, Corwich.
This is the thing. Cameron knows how to write competent characters. And what I mean by competent is they are good at their actual job. Quaritch's job is to be the leader of a military operation that is, keeping the Na'vi at bay and making sure that the mission gets done. And if you watch closely in that opening scene where Quaritch is explaining things to his men, he's not a foaming at the mouth racist. He just says, you are not in Kansas anymore. Everything on this planet is here to kill you, and it will. I mean, he's basically giving him the drill sergeant, forget what you read in the stories or the news. This is for real now. And if you don't get your ass in gear, you're going to get killed. So he's really giving a speech that is a serious military commander getting his men in shape so that they don't get their asses kicked and go home in a box. That's pretty good. That's competent. That's a competent character. It's like, and like Michelle Rodriguez's character, she's a competent pilot. Sigourney Weaver's character, she's a competent scientist who actually practices real science. She collects samples. She does boring science shit. She thinks like a scientist. She doesn't understand all the military bullshit. She's just focused on the science.
My God, they're actually doing the methodology.
Cameron is good at that. Cameron knows how to write that. Even in the second film, which is kind of a mess plot-wise, he still is able to write competent characters well. It's so hilarious to watch something like Secret Invasion, where I say it and I mean it. These are stupid people that write these shows. Cameron can write a military commander who knows what he's doing and gives the troops an important safety drill, right? That's no bullshit. A woke writer on Secret Invasion or Ahsoka cannot write that character. Admiral Thrawn is such a laughing joke in that show. He's so stupid. But if you gave Admiral Thrawn to James Cameron, he could have made that, I think, a really interesting character. Now, where James Cameron goes wrong is, and I don't know why, honestly, I don't think Cameron likes science fiction lore. I don't think he's a lore guy. He writes the basics he needs to get the story he wants, but he never wants to explore what's going on Earth. He never wants to dig deep into humans and why they are the way they are. It's like there's no complexity there, and that's the problem with Avatar, and it disappoints me greatly because it's like there's so much. His actual backstory of how all the technology and spaceflight works is as hard sci-fi as it gets. He literally has a detailed explanation of how those ships work that go and literally, where is this planet? He knows exactly where it is. It's in the Proxima Centauri solar system, which is our nearest neighbor. So it's about 4 light years away. And so he basically, so that 5-year trip is because they're traveling at about a fifth. They accelerate to about a fifth the speed of light. They decelerate about half of the way there. So they turn the ship around and they burn the reverse thrusters half. So he's got all of this figured out. And it's a very well thought out science fiction world. He explores none of that in the actual film, which is so disappointing to me because the reason the humans need the unobtainium is actually pretty interesting. You know, Earth has run out of resources. We're dying. And unobtainium is the fuel that is turning it all around. And it's the Earth is actually getting back on its feet thanks to this miracle substance. So when Jake Sully burns the whole thing down, he's actually dooming Earth. He's dooming humanity to a very gloomy future. And that is a very fascinating moral idea that you could have explored in that movie that he doesn't explore at all. It's very disappointing.
I never had that weight in watching it, so
that's all in the script notes. That's all in the notes that he wrote for the script. So that is the lore that's in Cameron's head. He just won't share it with us, the audience, which is very disappointing.
Now, before we depart, I gotta ask you, because you are a avid fan of nautical history, what is your favorite historical ship that you've researched? It can be one that's still surviving.
Think about it.
Oh,
she's still in service today. The USS Constitution.
Fair point. Fair enough.
Like by a mile. She's docked in Boston. I literally am friends with a guy who was in the Navy. His job in the Navy was he was one of the officers of that ship that did the guided tours and taught the history of it. And he when he talks about that ship, it's like he's talking about his first lost love. He's like, I love that ship so much. And I'm like, I can understand. She's a beauty. But maybe if I had to give a runner-up, for Star Fury on the Restream, I would say the HMS Victory.
Yes, the other oldest sailing ship.
Which is like a damn castle on the sea.
Yeah, it's interesting. The two, because I think they are the two, if not, I don't know if they're the two oldest sailing ships still active, or there might be I don't know if there's one between the Constitution and the Victory.
The Constitution is the oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy. She is technically, on paper, she is a commissioned ship of war and has remained in that condition for about 200 years. So she technically is on active duty in the U.S. Navy. She's not going to be deployed on any combat missions anytime soon, because her weaponry is a bit outdated. But
no,
she is in service. She is a serviced military vessel in the fleet.
Well, if there is a spy balloon that gets in very, very low altitude.
Yeah, it reminds me of that South Park clip when the British are coming to invade America again. And they're all on old sailing ships, full power, full sail ahead, and then the jets come in and they just annihilate all of the ships. They're like, how I forget what the line is, but it's so funny. They're firing muskets at the jets.
But the thing is, you have the Constitution, which is just, relatively low to the water, sleek.
Blue Man Blue.
Have a good night. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting the.
Thanks,
Fu Man Blue has actually been he's actually been following us ever since I started watching your podcast. He popped over to mine. He's been a regular ever since. And Wrangler, I will see you tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow for Weekly Lingot. But what I was going to say is the Constitution, the Victory, they're very starkly different warships. Granted, because they're from 2 different centuries, technically.
Well, no, they actually are. They're contemporaries. I mean, I guess you're saying Victory was commissioned in the 1700s and Constitution in the 1800s, but
I think no. Constitution 1798, 99,
1798 or 99. Yeah, so they're contemporaries, and
but they're from a different generation, at least. Like I said, you got this big giant castle ship, and then you have this.
Well, they're different. They're different ship classes because back in that time. The way that the British did it was there were basically 6 rates that you could have as a ship. So a first rate, I believe a first rate was a ship of the line, full blown Victory, multiple decks. Those ships were only used for blockades and major fleet actions like the Battle of Trafalgar. That's it. That's all they were. They were just big old war horses that you rolled out there as kind of floating artillery fortresses. That's basically all they were. And then ditto for the second and third rates. It's basically what they were. Major fleet actions. They were dreadnoughts. Then you had the fourth rate and fifth rate ships, which were more like the actual like out there cruising and doing stuff. Frigates were what you would have as a fifth or sixth rate vessel. So frigates and corvettes. They were where most of the action was at sea because they were out there attacking the enemy's ships, suppressing pirates, running packets that would be like mail and orders and stuff like that. That they were the patrols, and that was if you were a young officer making your stripes, you wanted to be on a frigate. You'd just be sitting there doing nothing most of the time if you're in like a full blown Victory type size ship. So the Constitution, by that standard, would have been like a fifth rate frigate. She was what they kind of a new class. It was basically a super frigate because the problem that early America had was we cannot compete with the French or the British Navy, or even really the Dutch Navy for that matter. It just wasn't possible. They had so many ships that we could never have competed with them. So what Isaac Humphreys, the designer of the Constitution and the other first six frigates, decided was if we can't beat them in numbers, we will be the tip of the spear. And so he designed a new type of frigate that was larger than the usual frigates of its day, but it was still small enough and agile enough that it could outfight any ship in its class, but it could flee from anything too big for it, or that was outnumbering it. And that's basically how they were designed. And so they're really brilliant. And they were, I hate to say it, they were based on a French ship design at the time.
Yes. Making it a very entertaining plot point in the adaptation of Master and Commander, because they try to work around the actual book, where in the movie they're like, yeah, so we saw this French ship being built in American port. But if you go to the original source material, you realize the surprise was actually fighting an American frigate, because it's basically the Acheron's supposed to be the Constitution. That's the whole thing. The Acheron's supposed to be the Constitution, but they had or the Constitution class, but had to it's like, oh no, it's the French, so we don't confuse the American audience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, they didn't want to turn off the American audience, and I'm like, see, you got to trust your audience a little more than that. We're big. We're big boys and girls. We can handle it.
Yeah,
I would think. But
I think it was called the Norfolk in the book. I could be wrong. It's actually adapting several books, I know. So
yeah, Master and Commander, the book took place. Jack Aubrey is chasing an American super frigate. It was actually, I believe, it was Captain Porter's ship. I forget which ship but that was based on a real story of one of the American frigates during the War of 1812 was just going around all of South America and just tearing apart British shipping, just tearing them apart. And that's basically what that story was based on. But they changed it in the movie to be a French ship because they didn't want to offend American audiences.
Just a few years later, by the way, guys, Letters from Iwo Jima were released and be far more successful than Flags of Our Fathers and Feeders. And it's all in Japanese. Just saying.
Yeah, Flags of Our Fathers is a strange film. It's a very strange film. I watched it recently. I loved it mostly, but it was such a strangely...
I just always like bringing that up, that I'm like, look, they made these two films, and which one succeeds in American theaters? Letters from Iwo Jima.
And I've seen
which is great.
Which is great.
Brilliant. So
that's a brilliant movie. But yeah, I would say one of my favorite portrayal of the Pacific Theater in World War II, though, is the HBO miniseries, The Pacific. That is such a glorious series. I frankly, this might be sacrilege, I actually kind of like The Pacific more than Band of Brothers even. It's just something about, and I didn't at first. At first, the first episode, for whatever reason, on Guadalcanal is always a little bit of a strangely paced, and it didn't really speak to me when I first started watching the Pacific, but by the end of the Pacific, I'm like, holy crap, man.
Garrett, this just in, 2/3 of my subscriber base are just now starting to because you said you prefer Pacific over Band of Brothers.
I know. Band of Brothers is brilliant. Both are true stories, the Pacific and Band of Brothers. They both follow real historical people. Dude, I
I
will
gotta
say
see
this.
Master of the Airs. I haven't, and because Master.
I just started it. I was reading Star Shatter, so I didn't have time to watch it today. But I'm gonna get into that, and I'll talk about it on the next Captain's Cast on the Swords and Starships channel. But I will say that the character and the real life person of Dick Winters from Band of Brothers is unbelievable. That guy was a real life Commander Shepard. 100%. Like his
Yes.
battle at what was the name? It's like it wasn't.
Was it Bastogne? When you
No,
think
no.
of that, I mean, they were
It's
involved in a lot of different.
when he takes out the artillery guns. That famous battle, and I forget the
Mm.
name. It was like something Court was the name of that manor, where he took out all those artillery nests with a small handful of
I know what
101st.
you're talking about. I just.
And honestly, the real historical fight, there's a great YouTube channel that does like full breakdowns of those battles, and they're really interesting. To this day, they study it at West Point. It's one of the most famous like squad unit attacks on a entrenched position in military history. And what's so amazing is when I actually saw that YouTube video going over all the details of it, I'm like, dude, Band of Brothers did not do that even justice. That was incredible what Dick Winters pulled off in that little attack. He was a brilliant leader. I mean, just a brilliant leader. And what an incredible man. Like he just is such an so yeah, I would say he probably definitely gives Band of Brothers the true edge. But I really love Private Sledge, played by the kid that was in Jurassic Park all those years ago. He plays Private Sledge in the Pacific, and he is just a brilliant character as well. So
No, nobody really talks about the Pacific. So I was excited when you did say that, though, because I'm like, it's good, guys. It's equal to Band of Brothers, if not in
you've
some
got to
areas.
get through the first two episodes. Like Lecky, who is a real life person, Lecky is a hard character, I think.
Do I have his book over there?
So you got to get through Lecky, and then once you get to
Pacific books
Private
over there.
Sledge, it's awesome.
I think I scared about Benedict Method. Yeah, I actually just put on the little clips this week. I think I have to tweak the audio on some of them because Jeff Daniels was, yeah, he can scare people when he pops on my chat. You know, he just comes out the bayonets and.
Brecourt Manor. That's the name of the battle. Brecourt Manor.
I know. Okay, that's it.
I've got to find this I got to recommend this though, because there's another YouTube channel that went through this and it was freaking amazing.
Was it History Undergrounds?
I'm looking for it in I have so many sub channels now. I have so many. And I'm like, I'm trying to find it.
Well, I know History Underground did a Brecourt Manor video. He's actually done multiple.
I don't think that's the one I saw, because there's one that's like
the operation rooms.
Epic History TV is a channel I follow. They do some. I don't know if that's the one I saw it on though. It was like, oh, that's it. The operations room. That's the name of the
okay.
channel.
I know which one you're talking about.
Oh, they have great YouTube videos. They really do. They break down all these famous battles from history, and their breakdown of Brecourt Manor. It was like, wow. The Band of Brothers did not do that justice. How genius that military, like that was a real life Commander Shepard moment for real. It's unbelievable.
Well, throughout tonight's stream, I had a little poll. I don't know if you got to see it, if you logged on or not.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Okay, so the poll was, what is the superior method of travel? Let's just say that. And you'll like this if YouTube would do its nice little job and load the chat up so I can see it. It's a nice white blank screen. I don't know if you ever have that happen when you try to go to like your own stream or something. It's just a nice white blank block. It could just be my computer.
I've not had that issue. So
yeah, it's literally right now. I can see hide chat and then where the chat should be. Well, the categories were, as I'm waiting, were sailing ships, hot rods. Yes, I worded it that way. Steam locomotives and flying contraptions. I don't know what to say else for steam locomotive.
Here's the interesting thing. I've actually only ever traveled in one of those four, and it is my preferred choice, which is sailing ships. I actually was on a historical sailing vessel called the Flagship Niagara for 2 weeks.
Oh,
I
I know where that
literally
is.
sailed.
Hey, we know where that is on this channel, right, Maji? Yeah, she knows about the Brig Niagara.
But I'll tell you something. Like the first couple days I was there, I was like, "What the hell am I doing? I'm sleeping in a hammock. I'm like, I'm getting up in the wee hours of the morning and standing watch." By the end of it, I was like, "I don't want to leave." I had to because I had a job I had to go back to. But the captain offered us to stay, and I was like, "Damn, I wish I could say yes." And but I climbed them. I climbed the mast. I climbed. I was furling the sails on the yard, set like 70 feet over the water on the Great Lakes. It was amazing, and it was a lot of fun. And it was research for my novel.
Oh,
So
yep. That would give you the experience. We're gonna try sometime in the future to do an episode of Retracing History up at the Erie Maritime Museum. That's where the Niagara has its birth.
yeah,
But I'll have to figure out the time. All right, so interestingly enough, right now we have a freeway tie between sailing ships, steam locomotives, and flying contraptions. But since you are our guest tonight, I know that you would pick sailing ships. I think that means by default, sailing ships wins as the coolest mode of transportation.
I don't know if it's the coolest. I would never say that. I would never say, dude, you've got to try sailing on a sailing ship. It's very cool. What I would say is that when you are under, every sail is set, and you are and it is 4 in the morning, and it is total darkness on the Great Lakes, and all you can hear is the sound of the sails, the wind in the sails, and the creaking of the yards, and you are cutting through that water. It is definitely one of the most beautiful experiences you'll ever have. So I don't know if I'd say it's cool. It certainly isn't fast, but it is beautiful.
Part of
It
the
is
ship, part of the
majestic and
crew, part of the
wonderful.
ship, part of the crew, part of the ship, part of the crew. Oh, okay. I half expect sometimes if you join a sailing cruise ship, that's what happens at the end of your journey. Part of the ship, part of the crew.
I love that ship. I really do. She's a beauty. She's a reconstruction of the ship Oliver Hazard Perry commanded when he won the battle against the British on the Great Lakes. So
Yep. Yep. We've talked about all. We've never actually done a proper episode on the Battle of Lake Erie, and that's coming on. I mean, I have to. I'm in Pennsylvania, so I kind of have to go up there.
you do. You're
I've
lucky.
been.
You're lucky. You're
I've.
so close. But you know, we
Well,
always
I'm
never
not
visit the
that
things right in our
close.
backyard. I
Well,
was
it's like a free hour. You know, it's not that close for me.
it's closer than where I'm at. But
This is true. I am closer to the water than you are, so this is true.
oh man, I love that. I we stopped in. We went around the Mitten, and that was so much fun. And we stopped in several ports. I loved Kenosha. I just thought Kenosha was such a beautiful little town. I love their harbor. It's like so. Everywhere had something cool. We stopped in Green Bay, but like yeah, and then when I saw that the riots were destroying Kenosha, Wisconsin, I was like horrified because I was like, oh
Oh,
my
that's
god,
when you did that
that
rape. Oh no, you did it before.
it was
Okay, you're
before that. I sailed before those
Oh, okay.
events.
That'd be
That
an
was
interesting being on a sailing ship from the
yeah.
War of 1812, watching 21st century America go up in flames. It's like, that'd be an interesting juxtaposition, but
Pretty much. So yeah, so that was kind of the farthest I see. I went to I stopped in Philadelphia. I got actually stuck. I was supposed to sail 2 days in a row on the Niagara, but there was a storm and the plane got grounded, and so I had to stay in Philadelphia for a night. And I thought, well, I might as well make the most of it. So I just went around the city and I looked at the Liberty Bell. My novel takes place a lot of it in Philadelphia, so that was part of the
you're
cool
like,
thing. Is
oh,
like
okay, I'm here.
I went to Independence Hall and saw the Liberty Bell. Went to like the Museum of the American Revolution.
Oh,
Had
I've heard great things about it.
it's
I've
mostly
got to
great.
talk.
It's
I've
mostly
talked about
great.
several
That
people.
I would argue there's a couple exhibits in there that are pushing it with kind of some of the revisionist history we've seen with critical race theory and stuff. There's a couple exhibits that bothered me a little because I felt like they weren't telling the whole story. Because they told the story about how the British were offering sanctuary to slaves who fought for the British, but they weren't talking about
What
the fact that George Washington
first
also,
Rhode Island regiment?
yeah. So there's that, but mostly it was pretty amazing. Mostly it was a really awesome and well, I will say this: the artifacts they have are unbelievable. They've got so many swords, and you know I love swords, and they
Swords,
have so many muskets,
swords.
so many pistols. It's so their exhibits are to die for. But yes, and then I went to the Old City Tavern and ate like traditional 18th century tavern food, which was awesome. So it's very cool. I had great fun in Philadelphia. I did not. I got to see where the original first Congress and Senate sat, which was unbelievable. Like the desks, 16 desks, because that's how many states there were. The fireplace, the real room where they sat, which is amazing because Philadelphia was the capital before Washington D.C.
Yeah, for about a decade. Well, well, if you include the Revolution, almost over 2 decades. If you include the Revolution time.
Yeah, a lot of people don't real. And so, but because Independence Hall is in great demand and you have to sign up in advance, I didn't have a pass, so I could not see inside where the Declaration was signed, and that was disappointing because I really wanted to see where the Declaration was signed. But I did get to see Ben Franklin's building, which was awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, when in doubt, if you have a question about 18th century American history, when in doubt, the answer is usually Ben Franklin.
He was really something else. He was quite the man. And honestly, I look at Elon Musk and I think he is kind of like he's kind of a modern Da Vinci or Ben Franklin type character. Like the things he's doing, inventing all these new technologies, it's like we're living in the presence of someone I think who was like Ben Franklin.
I don't know how I feel about the Neuralink though.
I don't know that I don't know. Actually, I would say kind of ideologically, he is kind of like that. He's a luminary because he advocates for principles of freedom of speech. And honestly, he's not that different in terms of we tend to lionize and idolize the founders, at least those of us that are sane. The wokies don't. But anyway, we tend to lionize them, but we also forget that they also were complicated people that were not perfect by any standard, and they had their failures, they had their failings as people, all of them did. And so it's like, yeah, Elon Musk isn't perfect. Of course he isn't. Neither was Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was he was a bit of a lech. You've got George Washington was a military failure for many years in his early life. It's like, so they weren't perfect people. And no real hero of history truly is. And I think that's, again, going back to the Bligh thing. That's why I love the Captain Bligh thing so much, because it's like, yes, on one side of his personality was the tyrant. The other side of his personality was the unstoppable leader who would get his men to safety at all costs. It's like, it's so fascinating that polarity exists in that same person. It's like, that's really just true of every human, though. It's like we all have these conflicting polarities that are so, it's why Kishkima's story is so brilliant in Godzilla -1. It's like he's got that polarity. One side of him is the coward. The other side is the man that'll die to defend his family against literally the impossible to kill Godzilla. So.
Well, Captain Garrett, if you combine your stream and my stream today, you have been streaming for 7+ consecutive hours.
I could go another 7. I don't know.
Unfortunately, it is 11 o'clock over here.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun.
It has been.
I apologize to
no.
my
That's
chat
why
that's still awake because of but I appreciate it.
You're just like, the chat's like, what the things we do for our captain.
Star Fury. he's like, I probably got to bed at 4 a.m.
We're going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be some news report. A British gentleman is in the street, highly inebriated, not because they're drunk, but because of just trying to stay awake.
Well, it's been super fun. We gotta chat again.
No. Like I said, I'm planning. Like I said, once I get the first book of Blood and Oak read, I'm planning. I'm gonna invite you back on so we gotta get more in juicy detail about it. But before you do depart, where can the audience find your podcast and your book? For the record, they're both in the links in the description below, but we're gonna let them shill anyways.
Yes, Swords and Starships is the handle on YouTube. So you can find me there on YouTube, Rumble, and X, formerly Twitter. And if you just go to Amazon, type Blood and Oak, you'll find it. So Blood and Oak. And there are 2 books in the series, and the first 2 books are really a complete arc. first book ends on a brutal cliffhanger. But I think a cliffhanger that also includes a lot of resolution to a lot of the plot arcs. So I think it was not a totally unreasonable cliffhanger. But that's because I had a book that was getting too long and I broke it into two. So think of the first two books as kind of season one. And I think the second book ends with a very satisfying conclusion with the promise of more adventures to come. So there you go. And it's meant to be a kind of full tilt adventure story in the vein of Three Musketeers or Count of Monte Cristo, Master and Commander. But I like action. I like it when the heroes actually draw their swords and have a sword fight. So I probably, the most stretching of history I probably did was, including probably more sword fights than would necessarily have happened. But then again, you'd be surprised. There were a lot of sword fights in those ships back then. There actually were. And part of it was just tactically, you're in a confined space. You spent your shot. You need to draw your sword. You kind of didn't have a choice back then. So it's not totally, but that's what it's meant. It's classic, larger than life adventure. It's emotional at its core. I tell a story where it's high stakes, high emotion, but it's not nihilistic. I don't like nihilistic stories. I like stories where there's a promise made to the reader and it pays off at the end. And that's always very important to me. So there you go.
And to satisfy, well, probably more myself than you. So once again, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Argyle. Just sum up quickly. What did you say about Argyle before you went to see it?
I saw the trailer
because
I went to see. Yes, I went to see Godzilla -1 again, and that trailer came on, and I was like, "Oh my god, why did I show up so early? I wish I had missed this." And I just remember thinking, "Okay, all of it looked so canned. It all just looked like a formulaic. It just looked like more bullshit MCU crap. Is just what it looked like to me. A bunch of boring MCU stuff." But the thing I think I hated the most about it, and trust me, it's worse than you can imagine in the actual film because I was watching it. I forgot to mention this on my stream. The main character is Bryce Dallas Howard. She's an author who writes. She's basically doing what Ian Fleming supposedly, what Ian Fleming did with James Bond, she is supposedly doing. She's writing this spy character, Argyle, and she gets roped into the spy world. The problem is, it is such a self-indulgent, like, writer's fan fiction. It's like a writer writing fan fiction about being a writer. It's awful. And I'm like, dude, we writers need to stop writing books about being writers. Being a writer, the actual act of writing is boring as hell. Nobody needs to see that. Same deal with filmmakers. One thing I don't like about Quentin Tarantino is he loves to just chew on the fact that, like, especially Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he just chews and chews and chews on being a filmmaker, making films. And it's like, I get that you like being a filmmaker. I don't think we need a film about being a filmmaker. You know what I mean? So it's just my opinion. But Argyle is the worst example of it. But yes, I saw the trailer, and I just thought, this is a cat lady writer, and it's awful. And I was right about it.
Yeah, so I encourage you to go see Storms and wow, you could tell how late it's
Swords and Stormcrows. Swords and Starships.
No, I was almost first going to say Steel and Stormbreak, but that is a book by the Lord Otter. Then I was going to say Storm and Starlight, and I'm like, no, that's not the name of the podcast. It's Swords and Starships, and I encourage you to see the podcast, including tonight's episode before he came on tonight. But I could also sum up Garrett's reaction, the whole stream, with this.
Fuck you! I was right! Fuck you! I was right! Fuck you!
I need that. I was trying to get that clip, but my downloader, I had to like do a premium to sign in and get that because it has profanity. I wanted that clip for my stream because that's exactly the Friday Night Tights guys were saying. Oh, Argyle looks cool. Henry Cavill's in it. It's by Matthew Vaughn, and I'm like, no, avoid. That was my reaction. Avoid this film, and I was so right. I told you I saw that trailer, and I was like, the trailer is offensive. I can't stand 1 minute of that trailer. It's so bad. But I think part of it is like I just intensely know that as a writer myself, and maybe that's kind of what I spotted, is like this is very self-indulgent. This is such a wish fulfillment fantasy but a really sad, pathetic one. Like, I'm a lonely cat lady author. It's as if George R. R. Martin, in the state in which he wrote that whining, sobbing book, blog post about how miserable 2023 was, it's as if in that state he writes a story in which
Oh,
Jaime
no.
Lannister comes to life and takes him to Westeros. How cringe that would be.
no.
That's what Argyle, I immediately sensed that's what
Don't
Argyle
give
is.
Martin an idea. Why are you giving him an idea?
Dude, it's that bad. It would be like, oh, Ned Stark is real? It's like, yes, your stories were about a real fantasy world. Come with us, George. Oh my God, it'd be terrible. It'd be so bad.
Oh, God. Well, I would like to thank you again for coming on. It's been a blast. And I can completely nerd out. To be honest, I could completely nerd out for another 4 or 5 hours. One problem, and this is the series and why we're ending, the StreamYards. I have yet to empty the storage on StreamYards, and I got a very finite window before I fill up, and this ain't all going to be saved. So
yeah, download all your stuff, because like
I am.
Yeah.
Well, believe me, guess what I'm doing tomorrow? Because I have the day off. Guess what tomorrow morning is looking for me? It's going to be me sitting.
Redoubt.
I've been doing it. It's just I haven't done it in a while. So yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on, and super fun.
No problem.
And I just love this little fellowship, this little corner of the internet. We're just, we're doing what we can. Doing our part, building up little by little.
Within the fellowship. It's a whole
That's
thing.
That's how it happens.
Are we at the bottom of the nerd barrel? Is this the bottom of it? Because there's different layers of the nerd barrel. Is this the current bottom? I'm not saying that's a bad thing in this case. I'm just saying.
Gary at Nerdrotic had a really good reply to George R. R. Martin's rant. Is like, having been in AA for so many years, he just said, you need to make a gratitude list to George. It's like, you need to list all the things you were grateful for in 2023, because no year is all bad. No year is all good. And you just, and that's part of the artist's journey. And so I loved that. I thought that is a brilliant point, because I need to do that. I need to make a gratitude list. And, but I already know that one of the things that I'm very grateful for is like, at this time last year, I was still fighting resistance. I had 8 subscribers on my channel, my buddies. I had 8 subscribers on my channel, and I had been dreaming and planning and thinking about this for 2 years. And finally, I'm like, okay, I'm really going to do it this time for like the 1,000th time. And I started working on my channel, and it finally got going. And then for a couple of months, I never did a live stream. And I thought, I really want to try a live stream. And finally, I got that going. And then I finally just made a resolution. Every Sunday, I'm going to be here. And so I ended the year with 1,200 subscribers. And it's like, that's awesome. Like, that's a great milestone to have achieved. That's a great benchmark. And the journey to 1 million subscribers starts with the first subscriber. So I think Gary's comment kind of helped add to that perspective for me. Like, that's something to be grateful for. And I'm super grateful for that. I'm just super grateful that anybody shows up at all to watch me.
Well, no, but it's like
I'm winning in that equation, I think.
What you started to say earlier was, and then we went down one of the many rabbit holes that exist in this digital space that's Redoubt Productions. You were saying about how, for years you're kind of like, basically the whole, am I going crazy? Am I the only one that thinks like this? And then I think most of us, it was us kind of all, I don't want to give all the credit to Friday Night Tights, but it is a large part of that went to it. They're like, wait, we're not the only ones thinking this.
Yeah, Critical Drinker was the one that the first time I watched, he was hilarious. I loved his review. His reviews are great reviews, and I miss reviews because I used to watch Ebert and Roper, and I loved their reviews. And there was also some guest reviewers back then before it got all wacky and political crazy. What I liked about Drinker was he did a very good structured review, but also just spoke plainly about the bullshit, the message, as he calls it. And I was like, yeah, exactly. And honestly, even I wasn't totally clued into everything at that time. Like, I felt something was wrong. It's like the Matrix. It's like a splinter in your mind, but you're not sure what it is. He just brought it right into crystal clear focus. And I'm like, oh my God, you are right. every one of these, this is what they're doing. And I thought, wow, I like this. And then that took me down the rabbit hole. So it's like, yes. And that's why the legacy, that's why they're so desperate to like vilify and lie about all of our positions. Because when they say, like George R. R. Martin, just that snide little comment about, I'm looking at a world that hates immigrants. It's like, that's a lie. It's a lie. Nobody agrees with that. Tell me one person, even in rural America, who does not have a neighbor who they know and are on friendly terms with, whose family comes from somewhere else. There's nobody now. We're at a point in our history, there's nobody. You can't go to any town in America and have it be all one ancestry or one cultural source. Like, it just isn't anymore. Nobody has it. So it's such a lie to say that. And I hate that but they do it because they're losing their grip, because we're discovering we're not alone. We are discovering that we have a voice and they can't control that. So when they try to lie about us, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to control us. They're trying to intimidate us. They're trying to shut us up. And they're finally, their grip is loosening. As Princess Leia magnificently put it, the harder you close your grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers. And that's exactly what's happening to the mainstream media and woke Hollywood. And they're losing. They're losing badly. I said this on my end of the year stream. They are losing badly. And that's why they're so angry, because they act as though they don't care that Ahsoka's a flop. They don't, we don't care that The Flash didn't make any money or whatever their stupid favorite woke project of the week is. It galls them. They hate it. They absolutely, that would be just the wokey shills online, guys like John Campea, just all the people pushing the narrative. That's what I mean by they. Yes.
Sorry.
Grace Randolph, would be an example, but all the creatives, Nia DaCosta, Kathleen Kennedy. So when I say they, I mean specifically those people in that sphere. They hate it that their movies are failing, because it means their stupid, cruel beliefs are failing. They're being rejected. That bothers them. They wanted Ahsoka and Secret Invasion and all these things that are filled with all this nastiness, all this misery and nihilism and the message. They wanted all those things, the Marvels, they wanted all those things to be multi-billion-dollar successes so that they could tell us how wrong we are. They're mad that they lost. And so they're doubling down and they're lying, and they're even getting more shrill. And Russell T Davies is like the best example of this. He's getting nastier to the Doctor Who fan base, not nicer, nastier. It's because he's losing and he knows it. So I find great comfort in that.
He is. I already wrote a whole paper about my issue with the Doctor Who 60th special and what he did. And well, I think I sent it to you. I don't know if you ever had the chance to read it. I already sent it to you again.
Did I send it to me again? I
did publish. I told you I was gonna write that. I did write that, and I said
send it to me again.
I will, because after I did it, because I laughed, I'm like, man, I've never used anything with this an account. And of course, the one time I do, it's out of anger. I don't like this, but
you're right, Maji Chad. Their movies are definitely da bomb.
Yeah, they're literally burning money, not in the way they
setting it on fire.
Well,
but that's the thing is we always say, like, why are they so incompetent? Like Chris Gore and Paul Chatto, I love them to death, but they often will cast it as like, oh, why are they? Chris Gore is pretty knowledgeable about filmmaking in the industry, so definitely credit where it's due. But they'll always say it like, oh, they just don't know how to do this, they don't know how to do that, and my view is a little more cynical. I'm like, no, they're succeeding by their own strange standard, which is. It's not about the money. It's about sending a message. That's what it is for them. Like they're succeeding.
Clip someday.
They would love it if they ruined Doctor Who and it's a giant success. They would love that. But they will settle for, okay, nobody likes it, but you don't have it either. It's scorched earth. It's like, yeah, nobody likes it, but we ruined it for you. We destroyed the sandcastle on our way out. So that's kind of where I think they're at, is like they're happy to settle for, we destroyed your thing. And that's why they say weird shit, like the shills say weird shit. Exactly, Maji Chan. If I can't have it, no one can. They're the crazy ex-boyfriend of the entertainment world. That's why the shills say weird shit like, "Oh, you men who don't like the Marvels just need to nut up and just stop being man babies." And it's like such a bizarre, just weird, unhinged reaction. Is like, that's their way of saying we destroyed your sandcastle. What are you going to do about it? You know, it's like because they're ascribing to us. They're arguing with us on positions we. I borrowed this one from Ripa. It's like they're arguing with us on positions we do not have, which is the most eloquent way I've ever heard anyone put it. They are arguing with positions we do not have.
No, I like that saying. Yeah, it summarizes it completely.
Yeah, they say we're anti-immigrant. They say we don't like women directing movies. They say we don't like women in Star Wars movies, as if Princess Leia has never existed before, or Padme Amidala has never existed before as a wise leader, a brave leader fighting for her people. They say almost every single position they ascribe to us is literally something none of us ever say, ever. Nor would we ever, because we are the fans of Star Trek. We are the fans of those things. Anyway, I could go on this all day.
Well, it is time to face the music. No, literally, see, there's music playing. They're literally facing the music. It's crazy. It's a saying, but it's real. Well, we're going to depart, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening. If you have not done so, be sure to subscribe to Swords and Starships. Okay, stop second guess yourself. Swords and Starships. Be sure to subscribe. Also, if you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe here to Readout Productions. We will resume our normal schedule this Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another edition of Uncut History. Have a good night, everybody.
Permission to disembark, sir.